Hello and welcome to Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. I'm Nick. I'm here with Vic.
Hello.
And we have a good one for you today with Will Schick.
Yeah, Will, he's awesome. As you'll hear in the interview, he and I went to American University. We're a part of the Masters of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program. He's a former Marine, got out as a major, was an Intel Bubba, and did 2 pumps in Afghanistan. So he definitely fits in with our Afghanistan theme that we got going on right now. So hopefully you guys enjoyed Miles Vining last episode. And we're going to continue to sort of unpack some of these experiences from people who were there firsthand and really delve into what it was like and what it is like now that everyone's home and we are no longer there.
Yeah, this kind of happenstance. We've rearranged our launch plans. This is only episode 4, so
an awesome 4, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say no one could have done better.
To you, sir. Yeah.
And you as well, sir. So with the pull out of Afghanistan, and Marine Corps Association is more than just professional development. We like to tell the stories of Marines
Absolutely.
And try and bring Marines together and connect the generations and just all sorts of things. So between this podcast, Leatherneck Magazine, Marine Corps Gazette, there's a lot of different angles we can attack how Afghanistan went, what we learned from it.
Absolutely, and they're all different formats. So Leatherneck is going to unpack it in certain ways. Gazette is going to take that sort of professional academic look at Big Blue Arrow strategic stuff. And so what we're wanting to do is really get the boots on the ground perspective, and sort of like we've talked about in previous episodes, and what you'll hear is us just sort of dialing in on the narrative, and that the things that happened mattered, no matter whether you were that Medal of Honor winner, task force commander, or just the guy who stood post over a district center government place and kept things going, or the guy who fixed the generators to keep the lights on. Like, all of that stuff mattered, and just because we're not there anymore doesn't mean that our stories go away. So.
Yeah. If you have if you have breathed Afghanistan
or
air,
ate the bread, you can eat the bread.
Or ate the bread. I hear they have bread in Afghanistan.
It's very good bread, actually.
So if you have breathed the air, eaten the bread in Afghanistan, we would
bled the blood.
Bled the blood. We would love to hear from you. So just reach out to us. We'll be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Absolutely. And just because you're not on the show doesn't mean you can't be part of the show. So please feel free to give us comments. And, completely objectively speaking, like, I have no dog in the fight here, but I think the content that we've had thus far has been pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
And so, if you, like me, have opinions about this stuff, or feel like somebody has said something awesome or maybe not so awesome, please let us know. Let us know you're out there, and we want to hear from you.
Yeah. We can work on ways to get your voice on podcasts too, so it just doesn't hurt to...
Or contribute to the Gazette, contribute to Leatherneck.
Yeah.
Let's get it out there.
Lots of avenues, lots of stories to tell. And it obviously goes beyond Afghanistan, too.
Absolutely right.
I'm not going to discredit any Marine who's hanging out in Korea right now just because they're in Korea, not Afghanistan. So all the stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Quantico, that's where we are.
The Crossroads.
The Crossroads. We're in Quantico, by the way. If you're in the area, we'd love to say hi. So with all that said, and without revealing too much from the interview with Will Schick, which is excellent, by the way.
Yeah.
I do want to give a shout-out, this time before the interview, to some deserving Marines and friends of Marines. We recently helped hold the Wounded Warrior Leadership Awards, and we got 6 names here I'd like to shout out. First is the Section Leader of the Year for Staff Sergeant Eduardo Mendoza from the Wounded Warrior Battalion West. The Recovering Service Member of the Year, Sergeant Edward D. Yee, also from Wounded Warrior West. We've got Enlisted Leader of the Year, Gunnery Sergeant Richard A. Galvin, who is from Wounded Warrior Battalion East. And we've got the Officer Leader of the Year, Captain Evan A. Amon from the Battalion West. And the 2 civilians are Civilian Staff Member of the Year, Mrs. LaShawn Carrasquillo from the Wounded Warrior Regiment, And the Family Caregiver of the Year, Mrs. Taria Williams from Wounded Warrior Battalion West. So Battalion West really carried
Coming
the mail
strong
this year, yeah. So,
But hey, and for everyone, not just the award winners, but everyone who participated in such a great cause like Wounded Warrior, thank you for your service, but especially to these award winners, thank you for everything you do. It really, again, it means so much, and these are the types of stories that we want to capture. So thank you, and Semper Fidelis.
and you can't just, there's not enough names to be able to shout out for anybody tied to Wounded Warriors. So,
Absolutely.
all right. So, without further ado,
Yeah, just one thing real quick on Will Schick. I really hope our listeners take away how Will was able to recapture the passion that he had as a Marine and then apply it to something so important as, advocacy for those who are experiencing homelessness. And so just for you listeners out there, just know that whether you're in uniform, out of uniform, missing being in uniform, or glad that you're not wearing it anymore, there is a way to capture that sense of community, that sense of purpose, and I think Will epitomizes that for us. So you guys, I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I enjoyed being a part of it.
all right. Without further ado, Will Schick.
Bye. Welcome, everyone, to another installment of Scuttlebutt. I am your host, Vic, and I am here with Will Schick. Will is a journalist and reporter for Street Sense. He was an active duty Marine for 11 years, got out as a major, then went to school and got his master's in fine art at American University, and is now full-time with Street Sense, and really looking forward to picking his brain on storytelling and the art of how art and life sort of mutually coexist and how one is a reflection of the other and vice versa. So Will, man, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So just take as much time or be as brief as you want, but if you could, for our listeners, just
Sure.
in your own words, sort of just tell us a little bit about who you are and your sort of your journey through life in the Corps and then where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. So I spent 11 years in the Marine Corps, where I was an intelligence officer. I did a couple tours to Afghanistan. My last tour ending in 2018. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I decided to pursue an MFA in creative writing and not go into sort of the contractor intel field or try to seek out a job as that. And as I was studying for this degree in creative writing, really being interested in fiction and storytelling, I stumbled upon an opportunity to start working at a local street paper where we wrote about issues related to homelessness in the city. And I kind of run into that opportunity because, one day I was on Google and I Googled sort of volunteer opportunity. I just, when I'd gotten out, I sat around for about 2 months with, at home, and that gets old really quickly. So I was looking for something to do. And then I kind of just Googled, volunteer opportunity. I found this place called Miriam's Kitchen. So unconnected to Street Sense, which is where I work now. Miriam's Kitchen is a local organization in D.C., like a local nonprofit that has programming for people who are homeless. So they provide breakfast and dinner, but in addition to that, they have other programs like a writers group, where you basically go in, you have coffee, and then you chat. You read something together and you chat about it, and then you go through a writing exercise. So I started working on that, and then through that, I learned about this street paper. So I thought, I'd look into that, and eventually I started writing for them on a volunteer basis. And then as I finished my degree, I ended up becoming a full-time journalist working for them, and then also this other news outlet called the DC Line, which is a local news blog based here in DC. And so the job I have now is a partnership between both.
That's awesome. And then we'll put this all in the show notes for our listeners so they can check it out. But you can go to streetsensemedia.org, or you just Google Street Sense Will Schick, Schick, and your sort of bio will come up, the whole list of articles that you've written. And like, really, man, we graduated in May, and you've already got looks like a couple dozen articles already down range, right, dude. So that's fantastic. Yeah, you do a lot of advocacy for the homeless, man. So really appreciate all of your efforts and sort of, obviously advocating for those who need it most. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just happy to be writing and writing about issues that I think are important.
Yeah, cool, dude. So, kind of talking about your path to the Marine Corps, I know this is for Marines, it's the hardest subject to talk about. But for all of those who are listening, those who are, in uniform now, maybe recently out of uniform, just tell us a little bit about your path, because I feel like both of ours are a little bit untraditional, and also too, both of us being of mixed race heritage. How much did that play into sort of forming your worldview and then bringing you to finally signing up to join the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because, so my mother is from Korea and she immigrated to the U.S. in the 80s, and my biological father was a veteran, an Air Force veteran. And so this idea of military service and then also sort of proving your worth to your country, right, and showing sort of a value to your country and doing something in return for that was something I was kind of raised with and thought about just a lot growing up, that, you'd have to appreciate the fact that you're an American and you have these things. And so when it came to the decision of joining the Marine Corps, however, I don't think any of those things sort of came to mind immediately. What comes to mind is, I'm senior in college. I went to a college in upstate New York. At the time, the Iraq War was sort of at its height, and I was getting drunk at a party.
Weird.
Having one of these passionate sort of debates about whether or not the U.S. should be at war in another country, and somebody had said something about how, it's not like you would ever join the military, right? It's not like you would ever go out there and be on the line, right? To risk your life for something your country wants you to do. And I remember hearing that and thinking, now, of course I would do something. And it was more like a throwdown sort of challenge. And then when I started to reach out to Marine Corps recruiters and others to talk about it, Marine Corps wasn't the only place I turned to. I talked to Army recruiters and Air Force recruiters, and it was only the Marine Corps recruiters who were saying stuff like, "Oh, dude, you're not the right fit. I'm sorry. You just couldn't make it. No offense to you, but you just wouldn't make it through this." And so that kind of got under my skin as well. And so I kind of fell sort of hook, line, and sinker to this challenge. I think of the Marty McFly, Back to the Future. Did you call me chicken? And thinking back, early 20s, I responded to that and I joined the Marine Corps. I mean, I wouldn't say that this idea of service to the country and all that wasn't at all in my mind, but I do think that there was some of that reverse psychology that had happened that also kind of influenced the decision to join. And when I joined, I remember signing, running my first PFT, where the gunny is driving his car behind me as I'm doing my 3 mile down some suburban street in New York somewhere. And then months later, flying down to OCS in Quantico and being at the airport in Reagan. And I remember getting off the flight in Reagan and seeing, I didn't know it at the time. I thought these were the drill instructors, right? I didn't even know it was a sergeant instructor. But I saw these guys yelling at folks, grabbing their luggage and getting onto the bus to Quantico. At the time, I didn't understand that these were just like Lance Corporals or whatever, just being, yelling at a bunch of guys that are going to be officers. And so I just ducked away to one of the bathrooms there, looked at the mirror for a little bit and asked myself, do I really want to do this? And I'm like, well, I haven't even tried. Let's get back out there. So I grabbed my luggage, got on the bus, and met somebody who was like, dude, who was private service, was like, dude, these guys are like they're not part of the program. They're just being difficult to be difficult. Um, uh, and then, that turned into what, over a decade of being in, and staying in.
That's awesome. Yeah, a very similar. I definitely had a hero complex, so I can't say that part didn't play a lot for me. But yeah, same sort of thing. Like, coming from a refugee family as well, there was this sense of like, there are a few sort of the difference between the immigrant worldview and the refugee worldview is the sense of like the need to give back, or this idea that that we need to contribute now that we're here. But for my family, it was like it was through medicine. Like, the quickest way for a refugee family to climb the ladder is to be a doctor. It's really a simple way. You go to school, and then all of a sudden you're already a few rungs up from where you left off. And so my family was pretty upset that I didn't go the doctor route. But at the same time, like, all of the men in my family were like, yeah, do that, man. But yeah, same sort of thing. So I went there, and they're like, yeah, we're sort of full, so I don't think you can make it in time. Maybe next year, if you're still interested, come see me. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't want me to join? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'll get it done. And so, yeah, same sort of thing. Like that challenge is thrown down. So that's funny. I wonder, just something probably about being on the street and just knowing what buttons to push for certain folks. But yeah, that challenge is definitely there for me as well. It's pretty funny. And that was all the way in California, so there's something in the water, man, for those guys. They can smell it on you. Well, that's really cool. And so I guess, speaking of refugees, and I don't want to go down too far a rabbit hole, because there's plenty of other podcasts and forums that'll delve a little more deeply and probably a little more formally into current events. But I do want to speak, because both of us have experience in Afghanistan, and like we were talking a little bit before the interview began, it's a pretty crazy time. There's a lot of folks reaching out, looking for help, would love nothing more than to be able to tell stories about their refugee experience. And so, like, what are some of your, I guess, thoughts on what's going on right now, especially considering you were just there, 2018, you said?
Yeah.
Was the last tour. Do you have some thoughts on something?
Yeah, so, I was in Afghanistan from 2017 to 2018 as a police advisor to the Afghan National Police force based out of Lashkar-Gah in Helmand. And so, I was at a base where it was mostly, Afghan locals, right? But we were advising them directly. It wasn't a coalition base. And so I was kind of in a unique position where I worked closely with a lot of Afghan translators and also like Afghan service members, either ANA or ANP. So this past week has been pretty hectic and difficult, not just emotionally, because of what's happening, but also because of, to be quite frank, pleas and cries for help that I'm getting, right, via Facebook messages, emails, text messages, phone calls from people asking to get out. And so, I know people who have. I know somebody right now who has a special immigrant visa, had it scheduled, was scheduled to be interviewed at the embassy in Kabul at the end of this month, and is now sort of frantic and waiting to get out. And I know somebody else who had a family member of theirs die sort of suddenly in the process of trying to get out. I won't get into the details of that particular incident, just out of respect for that family. But there are many others that are like that. And so what I'm hoping is that, there's a broad sort of interest, it seems, within the country, like an outpouring of support for refugees and speaking out in this particular moment. But I really hope that it kind of lasts beyond this moment and kind of stays, right?
Yeah.
I think just as like a veteran, and I think a lot of other vets feel the same way, is that, not many people were interested in Afghanistan. I don't feel, at least personally, when I got back from Afghanistan and try to talk about my experience, people kind of, their eyes glaze over and you're like, you're some nut job, the things you're talking about are insane, right? Like this, you must be mistaken in how you're kind of framing this, because that makes no sense. It goes counter to our understanding. And I think now people are sort of reckoning with this idea of this sort of the contradictions that existed, asking themselves the question of how is it possible that a country can collapse in 11 days?
Right.
And as somebody that was sort of involved in like advising folks that were there, I could say, well, I wish you were asking these questions, way sooner about what was happening and had cared. And just, I don't know, I feel like often just since the time I came back, especially from this last deployment, I feel like people haven't really cared much. And prior to that, I did another tour in 2011, and I had gotten back, and that was during the sort of troop surge and drawdown period. So I kind of see a little bit of both. And when I come back, I think 2014 was when they did, Obama did the withdrawal. Yeah. And after 2014, I sort of forgot about it too, right? And so I feel like some of this is as harsh as it sounds, is also like just the way humans operate, which is at the same time really upsetting, right? To think that people will just forget and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was there in 11 and 12 when we were first laying the seed beds for withdrawal, and were publicly announcing that troop numbers are going to start to decrease, and that we're going to start doing more of that transfer of authority. And that was an ugly baby. I don't want to get too much into it, but
sure.
I sort of agree with you. I wish there were questions more earlier on of, can a country fold in 11 days? Vice, how is a country folding?
It sounds like to me, there's like the MLCOA, right? The enemy's most likely course of action, which is what you plan off of. But then you also plan off of like enemy's most dangerous course of action. And I wonder sometimes, like, I wonder now, like, what was the enemy's most dangerous course of action that you were talking about? And as a former intel professional, I would say that, a rapid sort of collapse of the government probably should have, I can say this in hindsight, but I think even at the time, a lot of us knew that senior members of the government, particularly in like the military and in the police force, were not particularly loyal, right, to the country itself. Like that's not, like that was never any secret. Like people knew that openly. I could talk about this all day, but
No, I know we're sort of going down a rabbit. But one thing I do want to say though, and how it sort of bleeds into what we are going to end up focusing on is, the idea of storytelling and the power of voice, points of view. And when we look at what's going on right now from our standing, like what is the American storyline? What is the story that veterans are going to be telling vice the story that politicians are going to be telling? Where does art meet life, and where do they not necessarily coexist? And I'm really just thinking more about like the perception now that after Iraq, you could go about as far back as Saigon, where are we sitting? Like, what are some of your thoughts? As an intelligence professional, like this perception of having a moral standing in the international community. Like, where does that fall? Where are we sitting now? What is our story to tell the rest of the world now?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that we have many stories that we can tell, right? And it depends. One of the things I look at often as a journalist is like who's involved in telling that particular story, right? Who have we invited to have a seat at the table to discuss their version or their perspective of things? And often what we saw in journalism in the past was that the folks who were able to tell their stories were a very limited group of people, right? With limited perspectives. And now, rise in internet, technology, et cetera, this group of people who can voice their opinion in a public manner in a way that a lot of people can kind of see is there. I don't know if the story of Afghanistan has been fully captured, and I don't know if one person will be able to fully capture it all, and whether or not the United States comes away with one particular message. But what is interesting to me is, one of the reasons why I think back to 2018. I got promoted to major in like 2017, and at the time, I was, even up to then, I was thinking about staying in, pursuing the 20-year retirement in the Marine Corps. But what was happening to me at the time was this sort of personal coming to this growing disconnect within myself about how to communicate ideas that I had, like having something to say. And I felt like I had something to say, but I just couldn't quite figure out how to say it. And so I started reading a lot of fiction. I started reading just other stories, and I would come across some things in some places where I would think, wow, they really get me, or they really get this idea. I remember reading Light in August by William Faulkner, which follows the journey of a man who's half black in the U.S. South during a time when that wasn't easy. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, Faulkner gets it. But I couldn't quite articulate what it meant, or what it was that I was kind of referring to. I just felt like there was something emotional there that I was more interested in, and I was less interested in, sort of battle tracking or numbers and things like that. And so I started looking into this creative writing realm, and I started writing stories of my own, just in my notebook, and with this sort of drive that I had something to say and I wanted to say it. I just hadn't figured it out yet. I think even now with a MFA, which people at the time were like, dude, what the hell is an MFA? How are you gonna live? Like, how are you gonna make a living? Do you realize that journalists make no money? And they're like, you're crazy. You can give up the 20-year retirement. It's only 9 more years to go. And I was thinking, I don't know if I have 9 years. You never know what happens. And so this idea too that, life is not forever for everyone. We can never tell. And so might as well operate in the moment. And so, I ended up doing the MFA, and as I was doing that, kind of journeyed into journalism, and started learning about things that were happening in my own community that I had little understanding of, right? Like when I started volunteering with people who were experiencing homelessness, which is the language that we use, it's at least in that community, to denote the fact that that it's like a temporary experience, right? Like people aren't homeless forever. It's not like an all-defining label, right? It's a particular, like a condition.
It's a season.
That's time period, right? That shouldn't be, permanent. And so, anyways, when I first discovered, started talking to folks, I had no idea how they ended up where they ended up. And then when people started sharing their stories, it started to like, wow, that's really awful. You had this like terrible divorce, and then you went through a period where you lost your job, and had financial issues, and now you couldn't afford rent. And then you had a horrible experience at a shelter because X, Y, and Z happened, and now you're in a tent. And now you're struggling to make sort of the money that you need, right, to buy a home, because houses or to even rent a place, because where I live in D.C., rent for like a 2-bedroom is like $2,000. Like how are you gonna afford that? And so then I started like meeting people who literally are so poor that they have no other recourse but to sort of panhandle, right? Mm-hmm. To subsist, right? To survive, to get the meals, or to just get day by day. And I had never really paid that much attention to that beforehand. And I kind of applied my sort of intel skills to that, right? Because I would read, I guess, a news story about, or an article about homelessness. And I was like, oh, wow, you don't really talk to people who are living in the tents, like on the corner. Let me just go talk to them.
Yeah.
And I started to discover and sort of on my own, right, to even dismantle my own sort of stereotypes I had about that. I think I've entered a rabbit hole So if I
No, this is dude, these
pull me
are,
out.
I mean, the show's called Scuttlebutt, man. This is what we do. These are the kind of rabbit holes we're going to go down. This is really great, and I think there's some corollaries here in what we're talking about, in this idea of forgetting. I think it's an important theme, and why I think storytelling is so important, because we talked a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about the gatekeepers, or I mean, that's not the word you used, but that's the word I'll say that you used. But yeah, there's a certain narrative that sells books, or that major news outlets are going to gravitate towards. They're your commanding generals of badass task forces, or your Medal of Honor winners, or your war heroes, sorts of things, and so. From at least World According to Vic, it seems like the only narratives about the life of a soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman is someone who is super badass. And that's a great story. Many times it's very uplifting and motivating, but there's a 99% of the service, which is less than a 1% of the American population, that's not the case. They were still heroic. They still did their thing, but they just, maybe you know how it goes. I mean, you stood post, you went on patrol. You didn't die today, and you ate shitty tray rat food, and then you came home, and that's it. And your story maybe gets communicated at a bar somewhere when someone's nice enough to buy you a drink or something, but it just goes away. And so the public perception then is, you're either a badass or you're a commanding general, and those are our service members. And I think we lose some agency there. And so I think from a journalistic standpoint, with your military background, and now with your journalism background, like, you're in the trenches all the time. And I think, I don't know, maybe you could speak a little bit to that sort of our moral obligation to not forget, and not just in Afghanistan or not just in Iraq, but here at home too. Like, there's a lot of shit going on. These are really tough times for lots of people.
Yeah, so it is interesting, because the stories that you like you had mentioned, a lot of the stories about veterans center around these hero narratives of people who are just super badass, and you know me, and I am decidedly not badass, at least not in the way that these folks are depicted, and there are plenty of hero badasses that have been in the military, but I'm like, what, 5'6", $140. Soaking wet, I'm not this like huge gonna kick down a door. I wouldn't even know how to do that, right?
Hey, dude, you were the one guy at the MFA who was boxing
behind a desk, behind a computer, right? And so, and those stories are not really as popular or told in a way that's necessarily truthful. And I think this idea of not forgetting is, I think, important. But one of the things I've really learned becoming a journalist was how important it is to be engaged in your own community. And I think what we forget sometimes, if we're in the military and we've lived such a transient experience, going from duty station to duty station, is this idea of what forms a community that's outside of that, and like, what is an American community. And what I've discovered over the past several years that I've been doing journalism is that there are many people that are not forgetting, right? That are deeply involved in the issues that matter, that surround their neighborhoods, and are working sort of tirelessly to help that. But they're a small portion of that population, right? They're not everyone, and I include myself in that. Like, I for the longest time, like, I would live in a town and have no idea what was happening at City Hall. I never would ask about why that guy in the corner doesn't have a place to live, like why that guy in the corner is like so afraid of going to stay in a shelter. Or in many cases, for me, I'll talk to women who had a really negative experience at a shelter where they've been assaulted there, or experienced something very traumatic, and therefore don't feel safe. And so who's going to chase down those leads? And I think a lot of folks are happy to we're busy with our own lives, right? Like, there's only so much time in a day, and you have to go and do your own work. But if we want to build a better community, and if we want to be this nice place, being part of a democracy, allows you to be engaged. And if something is important to us, we will be engaged. And what I hope people, will do is, think about the things that matter to you. And if, the war in Afghanistan, what's happening to refugees matters to you, so to be engaged with it, but not just now, but, well into the future, like to not, and I think that's like the act of not forgetting. And for me, I don't know, I feel like some of the writing and the journalism work I do, I feel like it's very much a public service. I think a lot about the stories that I do write, what I write them about, and what I try to get people to take away, right? Every story I write, I try to do it in a way that it gives a reader actionable intelligence. Like, here's what you can do. And here's what you can do besides like donating money, right? Like, here are concrete things, like solutions that are being discussed about things we can do. Here's a voucher program that looks sort of promising or doesn't look promising, but here's what people are saying we can do to help it, and give people that in, like, here, the concrete things that people can do to be involved. And and so I don't know. I think that's the act of not forgetting, and just sort of not to use so much of this language that has become very popular now and sort of, I feel like, lost a lot of meaning. But I imagine a lot of us have certain kinds of privileges in our life, right? Whether it's have the privilege of being able to live in a home, have a job that pays us well, or pays you well enough to survive. The privilege of not being stuck behind in Afghanistan. And it's like, what do we do with these small privileges that we have, and how do we get involved? And most often, it's not just like making a social media post, right? Like, maybe instead of that, we can like email a city council member, right? Or call a congressman. And so I'll see people making grandstands on my own Facebook page, and I might be guilty of this as well, right? In the past, but it's like those things are meaningless unless there's a corresponding sort of action within this democratic society that we're living in.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to tease out, man. I think, and what I want to talk to next about is like, it's sacrifice now. We had like sort of this, one of the things we say at Old House Ruble is, you're blessed to be a blessing, or you're privileged to be a privilege. And so where then does our advocacy or our sacrifice go beyond memes and 140 character tweets, which I think it's more now, but I don't really know technology. So like that idea then of like, especially as we're talking, as veterans, talking to veterans or talking about veterans, where the sacrifice is very tangible, where does it keep going? And does it matter, I guess, is the big question. We see so much going on in the world right now. It seems so overwhelming that it's almost, it can almost, like, you could get it in a vapor lock if if you're not careful, if you're not disciplined, and if you're not passionate. And so does it matter? It's like, does it matter that we sacrifice on the behalf of others, or are we just in a place where I've got to keep my nose to the grindstone and just do what I can when I can?
I don't know if there's one right answer to that, right? I think there's like periods of time where you might have to, keep your head down and sort of carry on, and then other times where maybe you're taking a breather and you see something, you can do something about it to do something. But what I think was really eye-opening to me, making that transition from Marine to civilian, was just how many opportunities there are out in the civilian world to take action, to do stuff, to serve your community. And before, I think when you're in the military, like, everything you're doing, right, is in part of that service. But when you leave, you sort of like there was a gray period for me where I'm like, what do I do? Like, how do I make myself relevant to society? And I found that there's a lot. And I found that there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of things like in service to the community, whether it's like starting their own sort of I'm blanking on the words, but where people give out food,
Like a food bank type thing.
Yeah, pantries, like
pantries.
people who start pantries or draw, helping to tutor children who are at risk, or all sorts of stuff that's happening that we don't really think about. And I think in the military, you don't have the time sometimes, right, to think about all these things. I'm either on a deployment, or I'm in a pre-deployment period, or I'm in the field training. And so it's like, you might not have the time to think about all these other things. But for folks who are out, there are plenty of opportunities that are out there and a lot of things, to do. And I think sometimes it can feel overwhelming because this world is far from perfect. And there's a lot of things we can do to improve it, but you can't improve it all. So you kind of have to make a decision as to what you want to dedicate your efforts on. And I think it just, the sheer scope of stuff that's out there that people are doing is what really hit me hard. And I think right now, for a lot of folks, at least where I live, and I know this is probably true nationally, is that there is a crisis, and crisis is a word that we use a lot. A lot of journalists use a lot to describe sort of the dearth of affordable housing. Right, housing costs have gone super, super high, and salaries aren't necessarily rising commensurate to that. And so for folks who are making minimum wage in a lot of places, like even if you work overtime, like you couldn't afford to have an apartment. And that's kind of like rent an apartment, like any kind of apartment, which is kind of ridiculous, And so but it's like, what are the solutions to that, right? Because you can't just like focus on the problem. You have to think about the solution. And so, I think I was working on a story recently where I discovered like one solution was shared housing, right? Like, well, if you can't afford it, like maybe you can afford the place if you grab like a bunch of roommates and then figure out this shared living solution. And maybe there are places that connect you to folks, that have vetted them. And so there are programs like that are out there. And so, I don't know. I just think of ways to make yourself relevant to society, like, I think that's a Marine Corps thing, like you don't sit around and like complain about things that are happening, right? Like you kind of go out and try to find a solution to whatever it is you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to tie this back into our talk about narrative.
Sure.
And how when you have this pervasive narrative of like this sort of the hero gets to tell the story, when you look at the amount of crises, to use that word again, that are going on right now, you feel like the only way I can be helpful is if I do something large scale or grandiose. And because the prevailing narrative isn't that person that, because they stood post, because they went on patrol, they helped keep everybody alive. Since that narrative isn't as pervasive as the guy who, uses his arm that hauled the grenade, to then kill a, machine gun nest from where he got his arm shot off. So since that isn't what, owns the story, or isn't, dominating the sort of the collective corporate narrative, then you feel like, well, if I can't do it big, then I can't do it at all. I don't know. Does that resonate, or am I grasping for straws here?
I think so. One of the things I think about is, when we talk about, when I was an intelligence officer and we talked about intelligence and how to communicate it, one of the things we looked at a lot was how to present data to people in a way that they would understand it. And so, I'm thinking of like an infantry battalion commander. And if I'm giving like this person, right, this briefing, there are certain ways that I would have to present that briefing in a way that this person will understand, right? Like I can't just be like, starting from just showing like an Excel spreadsheet or some weird chart with a bunch of lines and stuff everywhere, like a spaghetti noodle chart. Guys, get the fuck out of here, like I don't know what the hell it is. Or, like shut the hell
Next
up.
slide.
Like,
Next slide.
Or what the hell is wrong with you, kind of thing. And so what I learned in my career was that most people, most Marines, the best way they grasp something is through a story, particularly if it's like complicated, and telling them that story. And I spend a lot of time like working in like Excel spreadsheets, putting data, and then figuring out how to tell it. And complicated problems require that sort of tracking. And I'm doing that now, even with a story I'm doing about some how schools are using like American Rescue Plan money, but that's a whole other thing. But I'm like I'm putting stuff in Excel spreadsheets, but trying to craft a narrative out of the data, out of trends that I see in the data. And so I don't know. I think it's hard for some folks because you get inundated with a lot of information. You don't know necessarily how to process it. And a story in a narrative done in a tight way is easy to do it. The problem is that a lot of the narratives that we're familiar with are very simple narratives meant to fit very simple situations, like that hero's journey that you spoke of. It's really easy to understand a story about a guy that like attacks a machine gun nest, right, with like grenades and or somebody that's like thwarts an enemy attack of like 500 fighters, right, like on top of a hill or something. And those stories are important, right, to remember like these folks and like the amazing things that they've done. But when we try to talk about more complex problems like the war in Afghanistan, how do we do that in a way that captures it all? And I don't think anyone's quite cracked the nut on it yet, on how to do it in a way that is engaging enough for somebody to want to read or watch, right? Not in a way that doesn't lead to their eyes sort of glazing over and like, I don't know. I mean, it is kind of crazy, right? If you think about it. Yeah. So like a bunch of terrorists from Saudi Arabia, like that come legally to the United States and train at a flight school in Florida, go and like fly like their planes into towers 9/11, but they were connected to this other guy named Osama bin Laden, who wasn't in Saudi Arabia, but like in Afghanistan, but it ended up being actually living in Pakistan for years, led us to go to war with the Taliban because of their, I mean, it's just, you go down this hole and people are just like, already, your eyes are going to glaze over because you're like, this is just so nuts. At the same time, it's like just so information dense, right? Like just so dense, all these details that don't seem to matter. And also like we've heard a lot of this already. Yeah. And so, I mean, how much, and so I don't know if we've figured out how to tell it just yet. And, obviously it's like at this time, right, it's still unfolding.
Well, I think for people like yourself and like other people we've had on the show and hopefully more, I just continue to encourage all of us to participate in the dialogue, man. And, I think that everybody has a story to tell and they're all very important. And we need to just find those places outside of social media and outside of just amongst our friends, our echo chambers, to take control of that agency and don't let the gatekeepers, wherever they may be, sort of dictate, what the collective consciousness is about these issues.
Yeah, I would also say, kind of push back against the social media thing too, because it's here, right? And so go ahead and use it, right? Go ahead and use it and share, whatever your experiences are, but just understand, I think it's important for people to understand the limits of it, right? Like doing a social media post is not being, it can be engaging, right? And you can have some sort of public debate, but there are limits to that. And so, I think within the military community, one of the things I notice a lot with veteran community is, there is this growing divide between civilians and military. And like how to bridge that gap and how to communicate sort of our experiences to folks who are not in the military. And I think that's been a challenge for me as well. But I think for military folks is to know and understand that like while we've done a lot of interesting, great things for the country, right, and have made a lot of sacrifices. Other people have also made sacrifices in other sort of careers that are not militarily connected, but might have been, just as strenuous or hard. And so I think there's like this other, like, concurrently, and I can speak to my own experience, like just having this idea of this, me being exceptional or sort of outstanding or better than someone else because of my service to the country, and that's just not true. And we got to kind of bring ourselves down to earth when we talk about ourselves outside. I mean, it's all fun and good when you're, a Marine and you're like on a joint base somewhere and cracking jokes at the expense of the Air Force guy that's at the table. That's all cool. But like when you go out in the civilian,
that never happens. I don't know what you're talking
about. Placing all civilians at the butt of a joke when we're trying to communicate with them, and maybe just taking to understand it. Like not everybody is going to be a Marine, and I don't think everybody has to be one, right? Like because it doesn't make the Marines, but also like while the Marines might be a very exceptional service or organization, there are also other really exceptional services and organizations that people are doing some incredible things at. And I think we need to recognize their worth and importance within society as well. And so what I noticed in like the military echo chambers is this like we're exceptional kind of thing happening. Yeah. And then just like understanding that like somebody's not going to get everything that we talk about. Not the first go.
Yeah, stay engaged. I like that. Yeah. Well, I guess along those lines then, maybe we could talk more stylistic stuff then. So, there's a growing sort of medium, I guess is the word. I don't know. But, if you scour Netflix or any of the streaming services, you see a lot of this docudrama stuff, which, we could call basically long form journalism. And so you have creative nonfiction, you have these tremendous books like Rachel Louise Snyder, No Visible Bruises. We've got, but then at the same time, we've got, the sort of a journalistic aspect of nonfiction as well, where you are taking sort of you're providing that sort of authenticity and that authority to someone else. So it's, it's not your story, but you're telling someone else's story, but still using obviously your lens that you just can't separate yourself from. So can we talk a little bit about how that sort of creative nonfiction is in dialogue with journalism and how they are not like a history book or a after action report, or where does that engagement come in, where does that story, that narrative really permeate the text vice, just like you said, just sort of an information dump?
Yeah, and so I think there's a huge difference between military style writing and journalistic style writing, and even with creative nonfiction in some ways. Not that they're all mutually exclusive, but there are certain things within the conventions of each, right? Like military style writing relies on a lot of key phrases, things that people can kind of browse and look for to understand the situation. Also requires like people who are consuming that stuff like are all coming from a shared background and so know what all these acronyms stand for. And in journalism, we can't do that because people are not. So there's like the level of understanding that someone goes into it is going to be different. And then with creative nonfiction, you're using a lot of storytelling techniques to build things like scene and all that. And that can happen in journalism. I've never really seen it in military writing, but it can happen in military writing. Well, actually, no, that's not true. MCDP, all the MCDPs are, some of them are amazing. MCDP 6 is like a story, which is, I think, really well done. And it blends a lot of those elements together. And it's also done in a way that people outside of the military can understand. So just to contradict myself.
That's what we do here.
For a second there. I'm just thinking of it. And when I remember reading MCDP 6 for the first time, I'm like, wow, this is really well done. And now I actually understand what command and control is and why that's so important. But to get back at it, I think there is difference in terms of the conventions, but those differences and lines are blurring. And I think at the end of the day, what matters is what you want to communicate to your audience and how your audience is going to best understand that. And some people, can't understand it until they know what something, feels like, whether, what the place smells like, and how I just, not just what it looks like, but what a particular food might taste like, and or what the air might taste like, things like that. And so you'll see that like pop up in creative nonfiction, and sometimes in journalism, but each kind of has its place. And I think the level of sensory detail, that kind of stuff is what you more often see in like a creative.
That idea of like making something more experiential, like more tactile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so I think, so what are your thoughts then, as a journalist, you seem particularly situated to share in those experiences with not only the people you're writing about, but the things that you're writing about. What does that say for how we communicate with one another? And what it says as far as us crafting this narrative that we so desperately, I feel like, need to be tapping into.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand sort of the conditions that folks might be in. So I write a lot about housing and homelessness, and so I'll visit places that are being discussed. And so I remember writing about one encampment, and I was like, yeah, like it smells like piss. And so like I wrote that in my thing, right? Or it smells like urine is what I think the word I used. It's like it reeks of urine, I think is the phrase I used. But like, things like that are important for people to kind of take away as well. It's just what it's like to be in a specific place. And I think what's difficult about writing about military experiences or doing journalistic pieces on it is that it can be difficult to describe what it feels like to be there. And obviously I'm a human being. And so what I feel or see or sense is going to be different than what you feel or see or sense. And I even remember being deployed and coming out of the same meeting with another a Marine, and us two having a completely different idea of what just happened.
Yeah.
And so that happens. And so just like recognizing the fact, I think there's a lot of hate too sometimes for journalists, but like we're human beings as well. And so we're all subject to sort of human error. Journalists are generally like generalists. We don't like go and like develop a specialty in one field. I mean, we might develop like a beat or whatever, but generally we're not the end all be all experts. We're just trying to introduce people to that, whatever is happening. And so, like, I don't know. We all have our sort of varying sort of experiences, et cetera, that we bring into our work. My experience in the military like brings me into my work. So like I also cover the D.C. government and the impact of their policies. And my experience as like a Marine Corps vet makes me sort of have instilled in me a sort of healthy sense of skepticism for bureaucracy of any type, right? Of any kind of government bureaucracies. I'm always a little skeptical of what sort of promises are made or people that are saying, hey, this is like a 100% gonna work thing. I'm always really is that true? Is that how it's going to play out? And I think that helps my work.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I guess looping back, then we talk about sort of our moral obligations, not just as a country, but as human beings living amongst other human beings. So where you're at then, how much are you, or what are your thoughts, I guess, on like walking? I find it's hard to not empathize with someone when you walked in their shoes, or at least when you've engaged with their story. Do you find that to be the case, or are we in an information sort of era where reputation is the thing that's carrying the day over empathy carrying the day?
I don't know if I understand that second part.
So like we have so much information at our disposal now. I mean, between our phones, tablets, 24-hour news, all this stuff, it's hard for us to discern, to use a trite saying, fake news. And so I think it's easy for us to just fall back on the reputation of our news or our information sources. And it's distancing, though. I'm relying on this person or this medium or this thing to give me the information and to say with relative certainty, or at least relative comfort, that the information that I'm digesting is true, or as true as can be for the time that I'm allotting for myself to ingest this information. But yet, when we go into sort of an empathy standpoint, and I hear a narrative and I hear a story of somebody, and I am taken a little bit in their lives, I've occupied their headspace, I've walked in their shoes, I find it harder for me, even if I don't agree with what I'm being told, I find it harder for me to separate myself from that and to be ambivalent towards it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're kind of two different things, right, that are happening. So I think the one with the media, and what to consume, because there's so much out there, that's always a very difficult thing to kind of discuss. But I always try to shy away from or be very skeptical of people who talk in absolutist terms, or publications that use very absolutist terms or extreme, emotionally sort of provoking stuff. I always just a little bit of skepticism. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. I'll read a Slate article here and there, and I take them for what it's worth, right? Or like a BuzzFeed sort of piece, but I take it for sort of what it's worth. But I always just when people ask me, right, I tell them to just kind of raise an eyebrow, like maybe it's something that might be couched in a very extreme way. And if things are also like heavily dependent on like entertainment news, or if there's like stuff that's like gossip, I generally try to maybe that shouldn't be the one place you're getting all your information about what's happening. But I think on the other level, I think just using the term us, right, and talking about how we have all this access to information is also limiting in a way, because and this is just because of the demographic that I work with. I work and talk to a lot of people who are like experiencing extreme poverty in the U.S. And a lot of these folks don't have smartphones, or don't have like internets, don't have computers at home, and so they don't actually have access to a lot of this information. And so when I go out and do a story, I sometimes will ask their perspective on something that they didn't even know was happening. Like there might be like a community meeting about the space that they've carved out and are living in on like that sidewalk, and they would have no idea that that's what was happening, and so then I kind of try to bring them into the conversation, and oftentimes the things I learn are things that catch me completely off guard. The person's like, I don't want to be on this corner, like where there's a dearth of public restrooms, like I don't know where to go to the bathroom. The shelter says it's like too full. And so then when I bring that perspective in, then the community's like, oh, what the hell? And then they're calling their leaders. They're like, what's going on at that shelter? And then also like, this person doesn't want to stay at the shelter. Like, why can't they get into this housing program that our tax dollars are paying for? And so it becomes these other things, and so trying to give people that sort of information that's out there. And so I don't know, I kind of encourage folks to, when you get lost in like these big sort of national narratives, to bring things down to the ground. And as you said, like walking in someone else's shoes helps out. And so sometimes the best way to do that is to look just around your immediate surroundings, right? And look at maybe who's covering it. And I think a lot of local newspapers are doing that. They're disappearing, but the ones that are still around, doing stories about what's happening within your community. And those are oftentimes a good place to look to see not just what's going on around, but what you can do to help, or get involved if you want to get involved. And I'm not trying to point the finger at people that don't have the time to get involved, right? I understand that everybody has their own life, and you get busy, right? Like you might be working a full-time job and then have kids at home and all this stuff. So there's only so much you can do. And sometimes all you can do is maybe donate, $20 now and again, and that's completely fine. But stay informed of things that are happening around you. Sometimes it's good to, not necessarily rely on the 24-hour news you might be watching on TV, but look at the local newspaper, glance at some headlines, read something that's there.
Yeah, I think what you were mentioned earlier about the seasons, just understanding your season, and then when you get sort of some downtime or find yourself in a comfortable position, then maybe look to be a little more active. But yeah, I absolutely agree. There's a lot going on, and it can be overwhelming. So contribute where you can, and but yeah, like you said, stay informed. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Well, dude, we're coming sort of to the end here. I do want to talk to you a little bit, shifting gears massively here. But so you have such an interesting sort of journey that you've been on. Where do you feel like the Marine Corps sort of facilitated your professional development, and where do you feel like it could definitely use some improvement?
Well, I'll say that, when I started this job full time, so I've been doing journalism sort of freelance for the past few years and working at different publications. When I started this job full time in June, a few weeks went by, my boss was like, "Hey, Will, I gotta talk to you." And I was like, "Okay." And so I thought, oh God, I'm in trouble. And he's like, "Do you eat?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're just working so much. Are you good? Like, do you need more time off?" Or I'm like, "Why? Is there like something wrong with?" Like, "No, your work is great. It's excellent. You're just like working so much." So I just was curious if you're taking, time off that we've given you. Like, don't work more than the 40 hours a week. And I, definitely work more than the 40 hours a week. And that's something the Marine Corps just kind of conditioned me in. If you have a mission, you just go and you complete it. And something about it's like very luxurious about working 9 to 5. It seems like a half day sometimes. So I think the Marine Corps really prepared me well because that's made me stand out every place I've gone. And it's like to get up to go to a 9 o'clock, a job that starts at 9 a.m. is like, that's just so luxurious, right? I still can't get over that, how luxurious that is. Take my time sipping coffee in the morning and chilling out, having enough time to work out, even without the 2-hour break in the middle of the day, the 11 to 1300, whatever, So the Marine Corps has really instilled this this drive to get things done. And I never bring up a problem that I don't think I can solve, without the solution, right? I always present it as a solution or pitch a solution and pitch what I want to do next. And so that's like a Marine Corps sort of preparing me. I think where the Marine Corps sort of might fall short is the Marine Corps doesn't really teach you how to integrate into civilian life. As the Marine Corps, there's a lot of this exceptionalism narrative. We're the best of the best. And a lot of that can be very toxic when you leave the military. And I've talked to and then the Marine Corps, to be quite frank, is a very conservative organization as well. And that's not necessarily reflective of the entire world. And so when I left, I was kind of taken aback by how different the world on the outside looked of the military. The diversity of views that I saw was just so much wider in scope than I had initially encountered in the Marine Corps. I'll just be quite frank. Most of the folks in the Marine Corps you share values and share ideas about how the world works and how it should work. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I wasn't necessarily as prepared for encountering that much difference in opinion and ideas when I left. And then having that idea, and I've run across other Marines that are the same way, where they, to think that you're the very best of the best of all Americans, better than anyone doing anything else, is such a very toxic idea, and it's not going to get you very far. And it's cool to use that in the Marines when you're talking amongst Marines to kind of hype yourself up, but it's not something you should be carrying with you beyond the service. You should be recognizing the fact that there are other Americans doing important things for the U.S. And the country. I'm not saying that other Americans are better or whatever. I'm just saying that other people also should be included in this discussion about, who should be appreciated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. What about institutionally? Do you feel like the sort of the ways in which we develop future leaders, young people, do you feel like there is room for growth there?
Yeah, I think one of the things I got frustrated with as I started to move up in the Marines was, you can't tell a commander no to anything, right? Like you can't, like your CO, you can't ever just tell your CO like no, like no sir, we can't do that. Because you find other ways to say no, right? You like, if the CO tells you to like drive all the vehicles into the lake, you might be like, oh yes sir, we drove all the vehicles into the parking lot just like you asked. And so you're not saying no, you said yes, but you said yes to something else, right? Like, so you just do that enough, and then the commander's like, okay, well, I'm not going to ask you to do these ridiculous things anymore because clearly you're not going to do it like that. And so I think getting comfortable with, having this back and forth conversation, I notice in like my workplace now, like it's more of like an equal exchange. Even though I'm not the person that makes like ultimate decision on things. I feel much more on an equal footing with like the CEO, my editor and others. There's a little bit more of this free flow of how it is. I think some of it's necessary though, right? Like in the Marine Corps, like it's a hierarchy. There's a mission. At the end of the day, someone's got to tell you like, this is what you're going to do. There can't be like prolonged debates about whether or not like you should be starting to hike at 4:30 versus 4:45, right? Like this, and so I think some of it's necessary. And so I guess I'm also trying to be realistic about how much back and forth can be. But when I think about my time in the military, some of the best forums or places where I felt like my skills developed really well were like in EWS or command and staff. I didn't do that at the actual school. I did that on base, where there was like a colonel who led these professional PME sessions, and you got to meet with other officers from other places, and you'd work on group projects and have discussions, not just about what was happening in your own sort of workplace, but elsewhere. And there was this free flow discussion, and you felt like you were on equal footing, right? And even though there were assignments from whoever was in charge, it was like this kind of free exchange of ideas. And I think the more opportunities you get to do things like that, when you have a breather, are things that would help out. I think, from a realistic perspective. So at some point, like a chain of command is there for a reason, right? Like you have to have
There's a time and place, right?
Quickly, and you can't have prolonged debates on everything. And so I think some of that's necessary. And whereas like in a newspaper, sure, we have deadlines, but we can debate about what article goes next. But it's not like, we're talking about moving troops and material, right, to a hotspot location, right, where shit could go down.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's awesome, dude. All right, last question here for you, man. What was your best day in the Marine Corps? And it can't be the day you get your DD-214.
Yeah, the day I got my DD-214 was certainly one of the best, if not one of the best. It was a great feeling. But no, so when I think about it, actually 2 days come to mind. The first was when I was at OCS on July 4th, 2007. We were in a field putting up tents and taking them down, and just constantly. And there was a officer who came to talk to us about, how great it was that we were spending our 4th of July doing this kind of activity. And as I say this out loud, I realize, how kind of it just sounds funny to me, right? But I remember just being really happy in the moment doing this sort of mindless activity, exercise, and just, straight sort of institutional hazing, right? Getting us to sort of conform and build bonds with each other. And I felt really happy doing that. And it's also, there was like a disappointment, right? We set them up and then they made us tear them down, and we thought, oh God, how long is this going to go on for? And it was literally sort of all day. But then the other day that comes to mind is, I think it was maybe 2010. I was in Marine Corps Base, Hawaii, in K-Bay, and we were on the rifle range right there on the base, which the impact area is like a wildlife sanctuary with like birds and stuff. So anyways, I was there for a night shoot, and I'm on this peninsula jutting out into the ocean on K-Bay, and it's at night. You got my MBGs on, the one eye, and I remember doing this night shoot. We're facing targets and stuff, and I remember looking up just really quick and just catching a glimpse of the stars, and it's like shining, super like just beautiful. And then I remember kind of looking over to my right, and seeing whales jumping in the water.
No way.
And then I remember furious shouts at me, and then somebody grabbing me by the collar, and they're like, "You gotta face," and like, "You gotta like, dude, like we're giving commands," and I was completely lost in the moment, which I guess is not a good thing when you're on a live fire range. But I remember just that being a really excellent night shoot, and I think a bunch of us were sort of distracted by the whales as well. I mean, we were static; we weren't like walking and shooting at that part of the range. But it was a really great night, and it was one of those really long days, but it was just awesome.
That's great, man. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time, sort of sharing some nuggets of wisdom and giving us, I think a really important perspective, not just on what's going on in the world, but, how Marines, active and, those in uniform and out can sort of take control of the narrative and can participate and still, like you said, sort of find that same sort of passion in making things better, which is what we do as Marines, right? We always leave things better than when we found them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess theoretically, although I can't say that of all my experiences in the Marine Corps, that we left every place.
It's a good bumper sticker.
But I think we try, we certainly try. And so, I appreciate you having me on here, and always happy to talk.
Yeah, thanks, man. And again, check out Will on at Street Sense, streetsensemedia.org. We'll have links and stuff on the show notes. And then please hit him up on that website. It's Will at streetsensemedia.org. And again, we'll post links and stuff to that. So thank you so much, dude, for being on the show. And man, we'll try to see if maybe we get you back on some other time.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am Nick Wilson. That is Major Vic Rubel, U.S. Marine Corps retired. You have also heard the voices of or contributions from William Truding or Nancy Lichman, editors of Gazette and Leatherneck magazines, respectively. Opinions expressed in Scuttlebutt are just that, opinions, and do not represent any official stance of the MCA.